Mason Calloway heard it before he saw it, the unmistakable roar of a grizzly, followed by a human cry that cut through the New Mexico morning like a knife. In 15 years on the frontier, he learned one thing for certain. In these parts, a bear's growl almost always meant death. But this time, it would bring something entirely unexpected. His Winchester Model 1873 was in his hands before his mind fully registered the sound. The rifle, chambered in 44-40 to match his Colt Peacemaker, had saved his life more times than he cared to count. Mason vaulted onto his bay gelding and kicked hard, sending the horse racing toward the dry gulch. "Come on, boy," he muttered, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest, the same sensation he'd felt as a scout during the waning days of the war. His brother's face flashed through his mind, as it always did when danger approached. Too late to save him then. Maybe not too late now. At the rise above the gulch, Mason took in the scene in an instant. A massive grizzly, ribs showing beneath its mangy coat, was mauling an elderly Apache man who lay motionless on the ground. No time for hesitation. Mason dismounted in one fluid motion and took position behind a mesquite stand. He steadied his breathing, inhale, hold, aim, just as the Army had taught him. His first shot caught the bear in the shoulder. The beast reared up, 8 feet of fury, and turned toward the sound. Mason's second shot took it in the neck, the third dead center between the eyes. The bear collapsed with a final, shuddering growl. Keeping his rifle ready, Mason approached the fallen man cautiously. Blood soaked the ground beneath him, but he was alive, barely. Gray threaded through his black braids, deep lines etched in a face that had seen many seasons. Mason knelt beside him, checking the wounds. Deep gashes across the chest and a mangled arm, but no fatal injuries if treated quickly. The old man's eyes fluttered open, finding Mason's. No fear reflected there, only a calm assessment. "Guess this is your lucky day," Mason said, holstering his sidearm and preparing to lift the man. "Let's get you patched up." 3 days later, Mason wiped his forehead as he finished changing the old man's bandages. The cabin was quiet except for the occasional crackle from the fireplace. Mason had built this place himself after the war. Timber walls, stone hearth, and windows positioned to catch both morning and evening light. It wasn't much, but it was his. Just like the modest cattle operation and the irrigation system he'd engineered last fall, to divert the scarce rainwater to where it was needed most. The Apache elder hadn't spoken a word since Mason had brought him in, though his eyes tracked every movement around the cabin. Mason didn't press him. A man would speak when he was ready, not before. Mason was hauling in firewood the next morning when he found the cot empty. His hand instinctively reached for his rifle, then relaxed when he spotted movement by the hearth. The old man sat cross-legged before the fire, his bandaged torso held straight despite what must have been considerable pain. "You should be resting," Mason said, setting down the wood. The man kept his gaze on the flames. "You did not ask who I was." Mason remained standing. "Figured you'd tell me if it mattered." The elder nodded slowly. "It does." He turned to face Mason fully. "I am Chayton. My people are 10 ridges east, past the rocks shaped like teeth." "Name's Mason Calloway," Mason replied, crouching near the fire but maintaining a respectful distance. "You saved my life," Chayton continued. "That is seen." Mason shrugged. "Anyone would have done the same." Chayton's weathered face creased slightly. "No, not anyone." His eyes held Mason's with surprising intensity. "A warrior knows another warrior. You have seen battle." Mason's jaw tightened. He didn't like talking about the war. "That was a long time ago." Chayton didn't press further. Instead, he asked for water, which Mason provided. After drinking, the old man simply closed his eyes. Conversation over. The next morning, Chayton was gone. The door stood open, the cot empty, the fire cold. No footprints, no blood trail, Nothing to indicate a man severely injured had walked out. Mason scoured the perimeter, rifle in hand, but found no sign of the old man. It was as if Chayton had vanished into the dawn air. That night, sleep eluded Mason. The empty cabin felt more hollow than before. He'd spent years embracing solitude, but something about the old man's disappearance left him unsettled. When he finally drifted off near dawn, his dreams were filled with his brother's face and battlefields long past. A sound woke him. Mason's hand was on his Colt before his eyes fully opened. First light was just beginning to seep through the windows. Someone was in the cabin. She sat with her back to him, near the cold hearth, perfectly still. Long black hair fell down her back, tied with leather strips. Her deerskin dress was worn and patched in places, showing hard travel. A small leather satchel rested by her bare feet. Mason rose slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. "Who are you?" She turned, revealing bronze skin and dark, unflinching eyes that met his directly. Not a trace of fear or uncertainty in them, but something else, a wariness born of hard experience. "I am Nayeli, granddaughter of Chayton." Her voice was soft but clear, her English better than he expected. Mason lowered his gun but remained alert. "Your grandfather left yesterday, didn't say where he was going. He sent me." She stood, her movements fluid, despite obvious exhaustion. "My people believe a life saved must be honored. I am the payment." Mason's expression hardened. "I didn't save him to get payment. I know." Something in her tone made him look closer. There was tension in her shoulders, resignation in her stance. This wasn't a gift. It was an exile disguised as honor. "Why would they send you?" Her expression didn't change, but her hands tightened slightly. "I no longer have a place there." "And why's that?" She held his gaze. "I will prepare food if you allow me to stay." Mason studied her for a long moment. The unspoken history behind her words was clear enough. Whatever had happened, she had nowhere else to go. "You can stay," he said finally, "but you're not payment for anything. You're free to leave whenever you want." Relief flickered across her face, quickly masked. "I understand." 3 weeks later, Mason watched from the corner of his eye as Nayeli expertly gutted and cleaned the rabbit he'd shot that morning. Her movements were efficient, practiced, the same precision she brought to everything from tending his small garden to organizing his previously chaotic medical supplies. They'd fallen into an uneasy routine. Mason worked the ranch, Nayeli kept the cabin. Few words passed between them, but the silence had grown comfortable. He'd given her the cot, taking the floor for himself despite her protests. One evening as they ate rabbit stew, Mason finally asked the question that had been on his mind. "Your people, they cast you out. Why?" Nayeli set down her spoon, her face impassive. "My mother was a healer. When she died last winter, I became unnecessary. A woman with healing skills is never unnecessary." A bitter smile touched her lips. "A woman who has been taken is." Mason went still. "Taken? 3 summers ago. White traders." Her voice remained steady, but her knuckles whitened around her spoon. "They kept me for weeks. When they tired of me, they tried to sell me at a northern fort. The officer refused, said I was too damaged." Anger coiled in Mason's gut. "And your tribe? They took me back, fed me, gave me shelter." Her expression didn't change. "But a woman who has been touched by outsiders is no longer worthy of marriage. I became a burden. When you saved my grandfather, they saw an opportunity." Mason pushed his plate away, disgust rising in his throat, not at her, but at the men who'd harmed her and the tribe that had abandoned her. "You're not damaged," he said firmly, "and you're not a burden." Nayeli looked at him, surprise briefly crossing her features. "You are unusual for a white man. I've seen enough war to know it's not just bullets that leave scars." Mason stood uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. We need to check the east fence tomorrow. Cattle been getting out. If she noticed his abrupt change of subject, she didn't comment. Hold the rifle steady against your shoulder, Mason instructed, standing behind Nayeli. That's it. Now breathe in, then halfway out. Hold. Squeeze the trigger. Don't pull. The Winchester cracked, and the can placed on a fence post 50 yards away jumped and fell. Good shot, Mason said, genuinely impressed. It was her third attempt, and she was already showing remarkable accuracy. Why teach me this? Nayeli asked, lowering the rifle. Because out here, everyone needs to know how to protect themselves. He took the weapon, reloading it. My brother died because I wasn't fast enough. Won't let that happen again. She studied him with those penetrating eyes. The war, you fought in it? Scouted for the Union. Billy, my brother, joined up when he was barely 17. I promised our ma I'd look after him. Mason's voice grew distant. Apache raiding party hit our unit near Glorieta Pass. I was scouting ahead. By the time I got back, he fell silent, the memory still raw after all these years. You do not blame my people, Nayeli observed. It wasn't a question. I blame the war, Mason replied. Men fighting over land, sending boys to die for it. Apache, white, doesn't matter. War makes killers of us all. A distant dust cloud caught his attention. Riders moving fast toward the ranch. Get inside, Mason said, his voice hardening as he raised the rifle to his eye. Nayeli didn't move. Who comes? Trouble. 3 horsemen pulled up short of the cabin, the leader a hard-faced man with a thick mustache and cold eyes. Mason recognized him. Jack Harker, foreman from the Blackwell, spread 2 valleys over. Calloway, Harker called out, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. Heard you was harboring an Injun woman. Mason's finger rested just outside the trigger guard. My business ain't yours, Harker. Becomes everyone's business when Redskins are raiding again. Harker's eyes narrowed on Nayeli. Pearson's lost 6 horses last week. Found 2 of their hands with arrows in them. That has nothing to do with her, Mason replied evenly. You sure about that? Harker's hand drifted toward his holster. Maybe she's a spy. Maybe she's signaling her people where the easy pickings are. Mason stepped forward, rifle raised now. Last warning, Harker, right out. The tension stretched between them, neither man blinking. Finally, Harker spat again. Committee's forming in town, gonna deal with the Indian problem once and for all. You'd be wise to hand her over now. Save yourself the trouble. There won't be trouble unless you bring it, Mason said coldly. I served with General Crook. Tracked for him when he was hunting Geronimo. You think he'd take kindly to you, threatening one of his scouts? Uncertainty flickered in Harker's eyes. This ain't over, Calloway. Not by a long shot. As the riders galloped away, Nayeli moved to stand beside Mason. You did not fight them. 3 against 1 are bad odds. He lowered his rifle. And you can't reason with fools looking for a fight. The general you spoke of, you did not serve with him. Mason glanced at her. No, but Harker doesn't know that. For the first time, a genuine smile touched Nayeli's lips. It transformed her face, softening the hard edges carved by suffering. Mason found himself staring longer than he intended. You are a clever warrior, she said. Not clever enough. They'll be back. He turned toward the cabin. And next time, they'll bring more men. The drought hit in August, turning the land into a cracked, dusty wasteland. The creek dried to a trickle, and the cattle grew gaunt despite Mason's best efforts. He spent days trying to deepen the well, but the water table had dropped beyond his reach. We won't make it through winter like this, he admitted one evening, collapsing into a chair, exhaustion etched in every line of his body. Nayeli watched him from where she was grinding herbs. My people build cisterns to catch the rain. I can show you how. For the next week, they labored together under the merciless sun, hauling stones from the creek bed, mixing clay with straw, building a collection system that channeled water from the cabin roof into a deep pit. Mason's strength and Nayeli's precision complemented each other, neither complaining about the brutal work. When they finished, they stood side by side, covered in dust and sweat, surveying their creation. "It will work," she said simply. Mason nodded, feeling something he hadn't experienced in years, pride in building something new, not just maintaining what was. And something else too, watching her stand tall beside their creation, her face streaked with dirt but her eyes bright. The accident happened the following day. One of Mason's best horses caught its leg in loose wire, slicing deep into the fetlock. The animal thrashed wildly in pain, making it impossible to approach. "Damn it!" Mason cursed, trying to calm the panicked horse. "He'll tear that leg apart if we can't get to him." Without a word, Nayeli disappeared into the cabin, returning moments later with her medicine pouch. She approached the horse slowly, murmuring words in Apache that Mason couldn't understand. Remarkably, the horse settled, its eyes still wild with fear, but its movements stilling. "Hold him," she instructed. Mason gripped the halter while Nayeli examined the wound. Her hands moved with practiced confidence, applying a paste from her pouch before producing a bone needle and sinew thread. With precise, tiny stitches, she closed the deep gash, working with the focus of a surgeon. "My mother taught me," she explained without looking up. "A horse is too valuable to lose." When she finished, the wound was neatly closed, wrapped in a poultice that smelled of sage and other herbs Mason couldn't identify. The horse stood calmly now, the terror gone from its eyes. "You're a healer," Mason said with newfound respect. "Like your mother." Nayeli tied off the bandage. "I am, but after she died, they forgot what I knew, saw only what I had been." That evening, Mason retrieved a bundle from his trunk, a simple cotton dress that had belonged to his mother. "Never worn out here, too fine for ranch work, but clean and whole. This is yours," he said, holding it out. "If you want it." Nayeli looked at the dress, then at him, confusion evident. "Why?" "Because you've earned it," he said, then corrected himself. "No, not earned. It's yours because I want you to have it. No debt, no payment." Her fingers brushed his as she accepted the gift, and for the first time, Mason saw a real smile transform her face. Not wide or exuberant, but genuine, reaching her eyes. That night, they sat closer than usual, sharing stories as the fire burned low. She told him of her childhood, learning plants and healing from her mother. He spoke of his brother, the good times before the war took him. "I don't blame your people for what happened," Mason said. "Never did." Nayeli's hand reached across the space between them, resting lightly on his. "Then we both lost to the same fire," she said softly. He didn't pull away. The next morning, a rifle shot shattered the dawn silence. Mason was on his feet instantly, grabbing his Winchester and moving to the window in a single motion. "Stay down," he ordered Nayeli, who was already awake, clutching the cotton dress she'd slept in. Another shot rang out, splintering the window frame inches from Mason's head. He dropped low, crawling to the door. "Calloway," Harker's voice bellowed from beyond the corral. "Send out the squaw and we'll let you live." Mason peered through a crack in the shutters. 5 riders, including Harker, all armed. 2 were positioning themselves behind the barn, looking to flank the cabin. "They will burn us out," Nayeli said quietly, now at his side despite his warning. "Not if I can help it." Mason checked his ammunition. "There's a loose board under the bed. Small tunnel leads out behind the woodpile. My brother and I dug it years ago." Her eyes widened slightly. "You want me to run?" "No," Mason said firmly. "I want you to circle around and get to the rifle I keep in the barn. They won't be expecting fire from 2 directions." A smile touched her lips, the smile of a warrior. "You trust me with this?" "With my life," he answered, surprised at how true it felt. While Mason fired carefully placed shots to keep the attackers pinned down, Nayeli slipped through the escape tunnel. Minutes stretched like hours as Mason conserved ammunition, waiting. Then he heard it, the sharp crack of his second Winchester from the direction of the barn, followed by a cry of pain. One of Harker's men tumbled from his horse, clutching his shoulder. The unexpected counterattack threw the raiders into confusion. Mason used the opportunity to pick off another, shooting the gun from his hand with a precision shot. "That's 2 down, Harker," Mason shouted. "How many more men you willing to lose today?" Silence fell across the yard. Then Harker's voice, less certain now. "Committee's going to hear about this, Calloway. Tell them whatever you want, but know this. Next man who comes onto my land uninvited gets buried here." The remaining riders retreated, dragging their wounded companion. When the dust settled, Mason emerged cautiously from the cabin. Nayeli stepped out from the barn, the rifle held competently in her hands. They looked at each other across the yard. Partners now in a way neither had anticipated. "You are a good teacher," she said, gesturing with the rifle, "and you're a quick study." He glanced toward the retreating dust cloud. "They'll be back, with more men. Then we will be ready." There was no fear in her voice, only determination. That evening, as they repaired the damaged window, Mason studied her profile in the fading light. She worked with the same focus she brought to everything, but there was something different about her now, a confidence, a sense of belonging. "Nayeli," he said, testing the name on his tongue. "What does it mean?" She looked up, surprised by the question. "It means I love you in my language. My mother named me, hoping I would be loved." A shadow crossed her face. It was not to be. Mason set down his tools. "You should have a new name then, one that fits who you are now, not what others wanted you to be." She stilled. "You would give me a name?" "If you want it." She nodded slowly. Mason thought for a long moment. "Amara," he said finally. "It means eternal in the old language. Because what you've built here, what you are, it lasts." Her eyes widened, something vulnerable and hopeful flickering in their depths. Without a word, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his shoulder. Not an embrace, but a connection deeper than either expected. "I will keep it," she whispered. They were reinforcing the north fence a week later when 3 riders appeared on the horizon. Mason grabbed his rifle immediately, but Amara placed a hand on his arm. "They are Apache," she said, eyes narrowing. "From my grandfather's band." Mason kept the rifle ready as the riders approached. They stopped 30 yards out, and one dismounted, a middle-aged man with the same bearing as Chayton, the same sharp eyes. "You are Mason Calloway?" the man called. "I am," Mason answered, stepping forward but keeping Amara slightly behind him. "I am Waneta, son of Chayton." The man's face showed no emotion, but his voice carried authority. "My father has passed to the spirit world. He asks that you be told." Mason lowered his rifle slightly. "I'm sorry for your loss." He also said, "The woman stays with you." Waneta's gaze shifted to Amara. "We did not expect her to remain." "She stays by her choice," Mason replied firmly, "not by anyone's command." Waneta studied them both, his expression unreadable. Then he addressed Amara directly. "You were sent to honor a life debt. Why did you stay?" Amara stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Mason. "Because here, I am seen for what I am, not for what was done to me." Something shifted in Waneta's expression. Recognition, perhaps even respect. He nodded once. "Then you have found your path." He turned to go, then paused. "There is trouble coming. White men from the town speak of clearing all Apache from these lands." Mason's grip tightened on his rifle. "Harker, if you stand with us, we will stand with you," Waneta said. "My father believed you to be a man of honor. I would see if he was right." Mason exchanged a glance with Amara, reading the question in her eyes. He nodded once. "We stand together," Mason told Waneta, "against anyone who threatens our home." Waneta's face remained impassive. but he inclined his head slightly. Then we are allies. He mounted his horse, then added, we have seeds that grow with little water. My people will return in 3 days. We will trade as equals. As the riders disappeared over the ridge, Mason turned to Amara. Did you know this would happen? She shook her head, wonder in her eyes. No. My grandfather's word still carries weight, even after death. And Waneta, he was always fair, even when others were not. You think we can trust him? Her eyes met his, steady and sure. Yes, and we will need allies before the season turns. True to his word, Waneta returned with several members of his band. They brought drought-resistant seeds, medicinal plants, and knowledge about the land that Mason had never possessed despite his years living on it. In return, Mason offered tools, ammunition, and protection against the growing hostility from town. The alliance flourished. Amara's garden expanded with the new plants, producing food even as the drought persisted. Mason and the Apache warriors set up a warning system of lookouts to alert each other of approaching trouble. When Harker returned 2 weeks later with a dozen men, they found not just Mason waiting for them, but 8 Apache warriors positioned strategically around the property. The would-be raiders turned back without firing a shot. This ain't natural, Harker had shouted as they retreated. White man and Injun working together. Maybe that's the problem, Mason had called back. Should have happened a long time ago. That night, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the hills gold and crimson, Amara took Mason's hand and placed it gently on her belly. He looked at her questioningly, then understanding dawned. You're sure? He asked, his voice suddenly hoarse. She nodded, a smile blooming across her face. I am. Mason didn't speak. Instead, he pulled her close, holding her against his chest as the realization washed over him. A child, a future, something he'd never dared hope for after so many years alone. I was sent here, Amara whispered against his shirt, but I stayed by choice, and now we build something new. Mason looked out over the land, their land. The cistern they'd built together stood solid against the drought. The garden flourished with plants from both their worlds. The alliance with Waneta's people had brought security and prosperity neither could have achieved alone. And inside the cabin, carved into the window frame with the same blade Amara had used to heal his horse, was her name. Not Nayeli, the name given in hope of being loved, but Amara, eternal, lasting, like what they'd built together. Not just something new, Mason said, his hand still resting on her belly. Something that lasts. And in that quiet moment, as the sun slipped behind the New Mexico hills, the story of Mason Calloway and the woman once known as Nayeli transformed from one of survival to one of legacy, not ending in farewell, but in forever.